The Sixth Amendment gives all U.S. citizens the right to a speedy trial. Sounds great, doesn't it? Too bad Paul didn't have a law like that during his time. Rome had plenty of laws, but unfortunately they didn't have one like this. It's not all bad news though when it comes to Roman law. They had one really cool law that I like to call the Golden Buzzer Law. You know what the Golden Buzzer is, right? It's used on America's Got Talent. So basically, every judge votes people into the next round by using red buzzers, and you have to get a majority. But one time a year, each judge can hit the golden buzzer, just once a year. And if they hit that, you automatically advance into the live shows, and you can't be eliminated before then. So, there was a golden buzzer in the Roman law system, you're probably wondering? Well, yeah, sort of. It goes like this. Imagine you're in a courtroom on trial for stealing an orange, which you didn't do. And then you notice that the judge happens to be the teacher in school that was always blaming you for things you didn't do. Things aren't looking too good, right? So, you swallow hard, you make a decision, and you step up and press the golden buzzer, and boom! You're required to be sent to Washington, D.C. to have a trial in front of President Trump himself. President Trump will be the judge. Yep, the Romans had a law like that. It was called the Law of Appeal. One catch, you had to be a Roman citizen. Now that may not sound like that big of a deal, but actually a lot of people weren't official citizens. It was a big deal, and you got a lot of protections and special privileges when you became a Roman citizen. Good news for Paul, he was a Roman citizen. Well, in the Roman Empire, the head ruler wasn't called the president, of course, it was called the Caesar. And there wasn't an actual buzzer. Sad, I know. But what you had to do was say, I appeal to Caesar. You better mean it, though. When those words come out of your mouth, there's no taking them back. They're required to send you all the way to Rome to stand trial in front of the emperor himself. And that was a long way from Caesarea where Paul's at tonight. Well, last week Paul was a free man walking from Caesarea to Jerusalem with Dr. Luke. He knew there would be a showdown, and there was. 7 days later, he's under arrest now, riding in the night on horseback to Caesarea. And he has no clue how long he'll have to sit in Caesarea waiting for justice. Tonight is Acts chapters 24 to 26. Paul pushes the golden buzzer.
How you scary ghost people from the future doing? Hey, we've had a good ride so far. Only 3 more messages left here. I'm almost running out of paper in my scroll. Let's see, where did we leave off last time? Last time, I believe, we left Paul riding through the night on horseback, this time in chains, from Jerusalem up to Caesarea to stand trial. So that's where we'll pick it up today. He has to stand trial in front of the big honcho, the big boss, the governor. You guys have governors there in America in the future in 2020? Governors are kind of like rulers of sections of the empire for us. And Felix, he was the big shot, and he was the governor of that whole province. So yeah, Paul's got to stand trial in front of Felix. So let's get into it. So Paul gets there to Caesarea. He gets in front of Felix, and the Roman commander from Jerusalem sent this letter to explain. And so the letter's read: Claudius Lysias, that's the Roman commander's name, to His Excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man, referring to Paul, this man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him because I learned that he is a Roman citizen. Come on, really? Really? That's what happened? I rescued him because I learned he was a Roman citizen. Yeah. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin, and I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law. But there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. I found out about an assassination plot, that was true, and decided to send him to you immediately. I also ordered his accusers to present their case against him in front of you. Thank you, Commander Lysias. All right, 5 days later, the Jews from Jerusalem, remember it was a 3 or 4 day walk from Jerusalem up to Caesarea. 5 days later, the Jews got there, and they get in the courtroom, and we're going to have trial number 1 of the night. All right, so the Jews are there, and basically it was the high priest, Ananias, the elders, and their lawyer. They hired a lawyer named Tertullus. All right, so the trial starts. They bring their charges to the governor, and they have their lawyer stand up, and he says against Paul. And Paul's over there, and they're here. They say, Governor Felix, we've enjoyed long periods of peace under you, and all the foresight and reforms, good changes you brought about for our nation, we're grateful for it. And in every way, most excellent Felix, we acknowledge our deep gratitude to you. Okay, basically you're showing him respect, right? You might think it sounds like they're sucking up a little bit, but mostly they're just showing respect. But in order not to tire you out any further, I ask you to be kind enough to briefly hear our accusation. We have found this man to be a troublemaker. Everywhere he goes, he stirs up riots among Jews, literally all over the world. He's a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and he even tried to desecrate our temple, so we seized him. By examining everything, you're going to find out that everything we're saying is true, and that these charges against him are real. And all the Jews joined in and were like, yep, that's Tertullus said it right. Next, Paul's turn. Okay, Paul was in chains here, so I got to get into character here. All right, Paul stands up, and he says, Governor Felix, I know you've been in charge of this nation for a lot of years, and you've been a judge, so I'm glad to make my defense in front of you. You can easily verify that it was just 12 days ago I was here in Caesarea, and I walked down to Jerusalem. It was just 12 days ago. All right? I went down there to worship my God. I wasn't arguing with anybody. I wasn't stirring up a crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city. They can't prove any of the charges they're saying against me. However, I do admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way. That's what Christianity was called, the way, which they call a sect. But I believe everything that agrees with the law and everything that's written in the prophets. The law and the prophets meant, those were the books of the Old Testament, okay? I believe everything that agrees with the law and that's written in the prophets. And I have the same hope in God that these men have, that someday there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. And so I always try to keep my conscience clean in front of God and in front of people. I've been gone to Jerusalem for several years now, and I was going back there. I went back to Jerusalem to bring gifts for the poor and to bring offerings to God. Okay, that's what Jews go to Jerusalem to do. All right? I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple. There was no crowd. There was no chaos. I was bringing offerings to God and gifts for the poor, period. But then some Jews from the province of Asia saw me, and honestly, they're the ones that should be here if they have some charge to make against me. They saw me, stirred up everything, and they're the ones that should be here to make any charges. Unless these guys here can say specifically some clear, specific crime they saw me doing. The only thing I actually did that I can think of that would be something they would accuse me of is when I was in their court, I shouted out loud that I was on trial because I believe that God can raise people from the dead. Right, Governor Felix adjourned the court after that, and Felix, he knew about the Christianity. It was called the Way. He knew about it. He said, I'll make your decision, Paul, when the Roman commander who sent me this letter, when he gets up here from Jerusalem, then I'll make your decision. And he adjourned the court. He ordered the centurion to have Paul put in prison, kept under guard, but he gave him freedom to let his friends come. He could talk with his friends. It was kind of like being on house arrest, and they could come and take care of some of his needs. All right. So Governor Felix, he was Roman, obviously, but his wife, interestingly, her name was Drusilla, and she was Jewish. So they kind of had an intermarriage kind of thing going. But yeah, he was Roman. And one time, he actually sent for Paul privately and asked him if he could hear more about his faith and his religion. Okay? And Paul just sat there talking to him about how I believe Jesus was the chosen one, how God gave the prophecies he was going to send a chosen one someday, and Jesus was the one. And then Paul started talking about righteousness, about the need for self-control and how God is going to judge the world someday, so we have to live honorable, pure lives. And when he got to that stuff, Governor Felix kind of got nervous, and that's kind of maybe the same way for you when you start sharing with your friends. They're interested in certain things about Christianity, but then when it becomes personal, like the way they're supposed to live their life, and you talk about self-control, righteousness, judgment, that kind of stuff can weird him out. And so he kind of got weirded out. I was like, all right, that's enough for now, basically, Paul. You can leave, and if I want, I'll send for you if I want to hear some more. But kind of at the same time, in the back of his mind, he was hoping Paul would maybe slip him a little bribe under the table. You guys know what a bribe is? You give somebody money, and they can kind of make your case go away. He was hoping Paul would offer him a bribe. So he actually sent for him frequently. Well, 1 month turned into 2. 2 months turned into 4 months, still no decision. And Paul's just waiting in prison. 4 months turned into 8 months. 8 months turned into a year. A whole year. And then 1 year turned into 2 years. Guys, Paul was stuck in Caesarea for 2 years. Just waiting, walking with God, and trusting that this was a part of God's kingdom plan. How do you think you would do if you had to wait in prison for 2 years? Would you think, man, my whole life, my plan for my life is just getting wrecked right here? 2 years is a long time. For some of you in school, that's 2 whole grades, But that's what happened. Paul just sat there waiting in prison. Paul was a warrior. Still no verdict. And then, guess what happened? You guys maybe have this in America. Guess what happens to governors after they've served for a few years? Yeah, they get replaced. And that's what happened to Felix. He moved on, and a new governor was appointed in his place, governor named Festus. And Governor Felix, as he was leaving, decided, you know what? Before I leave, I'm going to just do a little favor for all those Jews down there in Jerusalem, and I'm just going to keep this Paul guy in prison. Thanks a lot, Governor Felix. Enjoy your retirement, right? And Paul's just stuck, sitting in prison. All right, so next, a brand new governor comes in. This guy's name is Festus, Governor Festus. So here we go all over again. So 3 days after coming to Caesarea to start his term as governor, and Paul's there, he says, you know what, I'm going to go down to Jerusalem. So he goes down to Jerusalem, and guess who found him? All those Jews, those Jewish leaders. They went to him and said, hey, Governor Festus, right? That's the name. Hey, we're so glad you're our new governor. Hey, we got something to tell you. So there's this dude named Paul, right? He's been in prison up there by you for 2 years. Felix hasn't done anything with him, just left him there. Hey, this guy, he is bad news, Festus. And you know what? We could actually take care of this for you. No problem. Why don't you just send him down here to Jerusalem, and we'll have a trial down here. How's that sound, Governor? You just send him down, and we'll take care of business. Governor Festus. Sweetie. Honey pie. Buddy. Come on, guys. 3 guesses as to what they were planning to do to Paul on his way down. Yeah, they were going to ambush him, kill him, all right? They tried to do that a few years earlier. But fortunately, Festus answers him and says, actually, I'm going to be going up to Caesarea pretty soon. Why don't you guys come with me, and we can have trial there. Here we go, deja vu all over again. So they go up to Caesarea, and we've got trial number 2. So the Jews start off, bring their accusations against Paul, and Paul gets to make his defense, and basically his defense is, in one sentence, I've done nothing wrong against the law of the Jews, or against the temple, or against Caesar. So Governor Festus, his time to make a decision, and he has a not-so-bright idea, and he says, hey, Paul, because he wanted to do, this is a little spoiler, he wanted to do the Jews a favor. He was a new governor, kind of win his way into their approval. He says, hey, Paul, would you be willing to go down to Jerusalem and stand trial in front of these guys there? Would you be willing to go down to Jerusalem? Now, what do you guys think? Was Paul born yesterday? No, he knows what's going on. He's a smart guy. He wasn't dumb. He knew the laws. There wasn't no need for any of that. All right? And so Paul says, still in chains, he says, hey, I'm standing in front of Caesar's court right here. What city is he in? He's in Caesarea, the city named after Caesar. This was the seat where the courts were held. This was the spot. I'm standing before Caesar's court right here in Caesarea. I haven't done anything wrong against these Jews. And you already know that. Now, Paul says, I'm fine with dying, okay? If I've done something that deserves death, I'm fine with dying. Spoiler alert, he already died once, right? I mean, so I'm fine with dying. But, if these charges they're bringing against me are phony, then nobody, Governor, respectfully, nobody, not even you, has the right to hand me over to them. Okay, Paul knew his rights and was like, I'm not playing that game. Okay? And then Paul did it. Paul reached out and pushed the golden buzzer and said, I appeal to Caesar. Okay, Governor Festus didn't see that coming. And so Festus kind of was flustered and took a step back, met with his leaders and said, you appealed to Caesar, you're going to go to Caesar. All right, so the final chapter in the story for tonight, Festus consults Herod. So, all right, Rome was in charge. Governor Festus was in charge. What he says goes. But there was a Jewish king in charge of the region too. And you might say, okay, wait. How does that work out? Are the Romans in charge, or is the Jewish king in charge? And well, the Romans are in charge, but it's kind of like yes and yes. See, the Romans were smart political leaders, and they said, you know what, we're going to be in charge, but in order to help keep some peace with these Jews are usually, they're used to having a leader that's a Jewish person. They call him king. King David, King Solomon, King Uzziah, all the Jewish kings from history. The Romans knew how they like to operate, and so they said, you know what, we'll give you a king. Herod can be your king. Herod Agrippa can be your king. And you can go to him, bring your Jewish cases to him, your religious stuff. He'll settle it. If you have any cases that need to come to us, we'll be here. You guys can't kill people, okay? If it's going to be a capital crime and you want to get somebody executed, you got to bring that to us. But all the littler stuff, you guys can take care of it. And so he kind of let the Jews operate with their own king, King Herod, but everybody knew Rome was in charge at the end of the day. But yeah, so the Roman governor and this Jewish king in the region were kind of supposed to work together. The Jewish king's name was Herod Agrippa. He had a wife. Her name was Bernice. And they just happened to drop by 3 days after Paul had pushed the golden buzzer. And so Herod Agrippa, he was Jewish, obviously. Governor Festus is Roman. And so Governor Festus told him about Paul and this trial and was like, hey, you're Jewish. Maybe you can help me understand this case I've got. It's kind of a weird case. So, and Herod's like, yeah, tell me about it. And so Governor Festus is like, yeah, so Felix left me this dude. He's been sitting in prison for a couple years. The Jews in Jerusalem want him killed. I put him on trial, but the crimes they were accusing him, it wasn't the kind of stuff I was like expecting. It was all just like religious questions and questions about their laws and about some dead guy named Jesus that this Paul guy says is still alive. All right. So I was going to send him to Jerusalem to stand trial there, but then he pushed the golden buzzer on me, so I got to send him to Rome. But I got to write a letter to Caesar to explain this case, and honestly, I don't know what I'm trying to write in this letter. All right. So maybe if you're not too busy, could you help me out? And so King Herod, him and his wife got together the very next day, put their royal clothes on, had their pomp and ceremony, walked into a special room where they're going to just kind of investigate things. And so Paul was like, all right, here we go again. But this time, listen to Paul. He kind of turns things around. He's like, you know what? This is my third trial. And actually, this wasn't an official trial. He's got to go to Rome. He pushed the golden buzzer. Herod is not really in charge, right? So, but listen to what Paul does. He already knows he's going to Rome. He kind of turns the table. He's always kingdom awake. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to use this to try to advance the gospel. Because if I can get King Herod to become a Christian, that's going to be a game changer. That's going to be a game changer for all the Christians in the Roman Empire and how we're treated by other Jews and by the Romans. And so Paul, who's on trial, actually goes on the offensive, trying to win King Herod for the gospel. Listen to this. Agrippa motions to Paul, okay, Paul, why don't you give me your story? So Paul makes his defense, but it's actually more of an offense than a defense. And Paul says this, King Herod, you're Jewish, so you understand Jewish issues and controversies, and so I consider myself really fortunate that I get to stand before you and present my case. So I just beg you to listen to me patiently. The Jews all know the way I've lived ever since I was a little boy. They can tell you I was raised as a Pharisee, which you know, King Herod, that's like the strictest sect in our religion, all right? My dad was a Pharisee, I was a Pharisee, all right? And basically, I'm on trial here because I believe the promise that God made to our ancestors, All right, you know he said he would send the chosen one and that the chosen one would rise from the dead. And God has done that. He's kept that promise. Why does it seem so hard for people to believe that God can raise somebody from the dead? Now, I used to be on their side, all right? Hated Christians, did everything I could to work against the name of Jesus of Nazareth. I was convinced that was my duty. This was wrong. This was a false religion. Tried to stamp it out, all right? I had people arrested. I went from town to town. I arrested women and men. I tried to stir them up, get them to say something bad, something blasphemous, so I could really have a charge against them. I chased them from synagogue to synagogue. Even some of them, they fled to other towns. I chased them down in their cities of refuge and tried to arrest them. Okay, on one of those trips, I was on my way to Damascus to round some of these Christians up, and this is what happened to me. I was just outside the city, and a bright light shone down on me. It was blazingly bright, and a voice came from heaven and said, "Saul, Saul, why are you harassing me?" So I said, "Who are you, Master?" And the voice said to me, "I'm Jesus, the one you're harassing. Now get up. I'm sending you to the Gentiles. You're going to be my witness to turn them from Satan's power to God's power so they can get forgiveness of their sins and a place in God's family with everyone else." So King Herod, I didn't disobey that vision. I went all over telling people they need to repent and turn to God and prove their repentance by the way they live. And yes, I went to the Gentiles. Now really, that's what this whole thing is about, King Agrippa. I went to the Gentiles. And these Jews can't figure out that it would even be fathomable that God would possibly reject any of them and go to Gentiles instead of them. And really, that's what this is all about. But God helped me. I went to the Gentiles, and God was working with me. And I'm not saying anything outside what the Old Testament prophets and Moses said would happen. They said that the chosen one would suffer, that he would be the first one to rise from the dead, and that he would take light to Jews and to Gentiles, to the nations. Now, at this point, guys, Governor Festus, who's sitting there listening to all this stuff, it's getting awkward. Paul's talking religious stuff with the king and leaning in and talking, and Governor Festus is getting really uncomfortable. And so he just interrupts. He's like, "Oh, whoa. He's like, Paul, all right, we know you got a lot of education, right? And honestly, probably what's happening is all that education is kind of driving you a little crazy, all right? Because you're talking some weird stuff here, all right? This is getting really awkward." And Paul just calmly replies to the governor and says, "I'm not insane. Everything that I'm saying is simple, clear, reasonable, and true. And King Herod is aware of these Jewish things, and he understands completely everything that I'm saying." And Paul just goes right on speaking to the king. He says, "King, you know everything that happened in our city 25 years ago. You know about this Jesus guy. You know how he was executed. You know how his followers claimed he rose from the dead. And you also know that that's what the prophets predicted would happen to the chosen one. Period." King Agrippa, and he looks at the King Agrippa and says, "King Agrippa, do you believe the Old Testament prophets and what they wrote about the chosen one? You do, don't you?" Do you guys see are you listening to this? Do you hear what's happening? Paul's the one with chains, but he's putting King Herod Agrippa on trial. Now, King Agrippa says to Paul, "Hey, Paul, you think you can persuade me to become a Christian in 10 minutes? And Paul looks right back at him, calmly and coolly, and says, "Whether it's a short time or a long time, I pray and hope to God that everybody can become what I am, except for these chains." And the king got up, and when the king gets up, everybody gets up. They left the room. The king got together with Governor Festus and said, "You know, this guy could have been set free if he wouldn't have pushed that golden buzzer." And the governor's like, I know. Well, that's it for tonight, guys, but Paul did push that golden buzzer. And so he's going to Rome to stand trial in front of Caesar, but there's no way he could have guessed the crazy, wild adventure that would be trying to get from Caesarea to Rome. And that'll be next week. We've only got 2 chapters left in our account. So Paul's final adventure starts next week. It'll be Final Adventure, Part 1. Be sure you don't miss it. But for this week, this has been chapters 24, 25, and 26 of our story, Acts. All right. Let's wrap this up. So some of you guys, you've heard that account before, and you think you already know the story. Let me tell you, you don't know this story, all right? And I've been saying this the whole series long. Dr. Luke's been saying it too. It's almost like we're in sync with each other. It's crazy. But this was not written to give you your history. This was written so you could figure out your destiny and your identity, okay? So if you think you understand this story, let me just challenge you. You probably don't understand this story. And there's stuff to be taken. This story isn't just about, I'm trying to say, it's not about just like internalizing a bunch of facts and details. First it was Felix, then it was Festus. There's a feel to this. There's an attitude to this Paul guy who's in the spotlight here, that you're supposed to not just like figure out so you can pass a quiz, but like internalize, because it should become a part of who you are. The same Holy Spirit that was inside Paul is not inside Paul anymore, because Paul's up in heaven. You know who that Holy Spirit is inside now? It's us. He was generation 1. We're generation 80. We are the carriers of the Holy Spirit now. And this is our destiny, is tied to these accounts and to the way Paul handled himself. So I encourage you, hopefully you didn't just listen to that account, you soaked it in, you got the feel of it. And I just want to touch on a few things from it. First of all, sitting in prison for 2 years. Did any of that sink in as you were listening to that? I mean, this is real life. This isn't just a story. This happened. This man sat in prison for 2 years. You might have something in your life that's like this. A 2-year exile, where it's like the plans you thought you had, XYZ, are like shut down. Okay? Soak this story in, guys. Let it go in deep. You need it. Paul was a warrior. But I also want you to see, did you notice how calm and bold he was at his trial? I mean, just controlled. Now, sometimes he kind of, he would lose it a little bit at some of the trials. He would snap a little bit, get triggered. But this one, just controlled, bold, and calm. I love it. He even turned the table on the governors, both of them, and was trying to evangelize them. King Herod at the end, especially. Paul believed, and I want you to soak this into your heart, guys. This was how Paul lived his life. I don't see this in a lot of Christians today. So I want you to take it in. I'm trying to take it in myself. Let it become a part of who I am. But Paul believed everybody in the world, if you ain't crazy, you should become a Christian. Paul believed it wasn't that hard to figure out. He thought it was the simplest thing in the world. All you have to do is be willing to follow evidence and logic. Just use your brain and think. It ain't hard. Okay? The prophets, and we have this stuff written down, said someday, all these Old Testament scrolls, they said someday God would send a chosen one to rescue the world. And you better listen to him when he comes. And to help give some identifiers, they said the city he would be born in, Micah chapter 5, look it up, Bethlehem. They say how he would suffer someday. Isaiah 53. Read Isaiah 53. The prophet Isaiah is talking about the chosen one coming in the future. Isaiah was written 700 years before Jesus was born. 700 BC around. Look it up. We have copies of Isaiah. Some people, it's so clear in Isaiah 53 that it seems to be referring to Jesus' crucifixion. They think like Christians went in and created the scroll of Isaiah afterwards to make it look like it was a prophecy, like a fake prophecy. The problem with that is the Dead Sea Scrolls we discovered, we have scrolls of Isaiah that are way older than Christianity, that are 2,300 years old today, the Great Isaiah Scroll. Google it. You can find it. You can read it digitally online with translations in English. But go home and look up Isaiah 53 and see what it says. It says the chosen one is going to suffer. And there's going to be people that surround him, and they put him to death even though he doesn't do anything wrong. Okay? So the scroll said this chosen one, when he comes, he's going to suffer a horrible death even though he does nothing wrong. And part 2, Psalms chapter 16, say he's not going to be allowed to decay. So those are the 2 pieces. These scrolls said he's going to die a horrible death even though he's innocent, but his body ain't going to be allowed to decay. Something going to happen that keeps that dead body from decaying. Guys, it's so clear. Has anybody else in history ever fulfilled both those prophecies? Lived a pure life, died a horrible death that they didn't deserve, and then was raised to life before their body was allowed to decay. No, pretty much just Jesus. Yeah. You see why Paul had this attitude? It's like, it's not rocket science. Why aren't you a Christian? Like, have you not read this? Do you not know? Do you not know about Jesus and what happened? To him, it was the most logical, natural thing in the world. I love how it says, verse 8 of chapter 26, if you caught it. He says, why should any person consider it hard to believe that God can raise people from the dead? Like, Paul just didn't get that. He doesn't think that's sophisticated. Well, I don't believe that God could raise somebody from the dead, miracles and such things. I'm an educated, scientist-minded person. Dr. Luke was a medical professional, okay? He was a scientist. Paul was incredibly well-educated. I mean, they just didn't have any they just wouldn't understand that view. But like, if you're educated, you should probably be a Christian. Why, again, do you think it's impossible for God to raise people from the dead? Let's think about that. How did we all get here? I mean, no matter what your belief in origins is, there was not life here forever, okay? Somehow we went from not being alive to being alive. There was some being or some force out there capable of creating life from something that wasn't life, manipulating molecules to start life, okay? I mean, think about that. Think about that. People talk about a Big Bang. Okay, who caused the Big Bang? If there was a Big Bang and it started that way, who was the intelligence behind that? Or it was just some like random accidental Big Bang and then, oops, oh my goodness, this planet is perfectly spaced from the sun. Just the perfect distance. Any closer, we'd all burn. Any further away, we'd all freeze. Oh, and the moon is just the perfect distance away from... And let me just get this DNA arranged randomly so that their amino acids can form into the proper protein shapes. And let me just write this DNA. You know the DNA code inside your body is more complex. Bill Gates says it's more complex by far than any computer they've ever built at Windows. And the DNA inside your body is ridiculously intelligent. It's like the most intelligent computer code in the world. Okay, that stuff doesn't just happen randomly. And to Paul and all the prophets, it just was like, guys, if you don't think there's a God, you're the crazy one. I'm sorry. Like, if you think random chance could have set this stuff up, this design, this detail, right, this kind of DNA, you're the crazy one. And to Paul, God was a given from the fact that there was a creation. And so if there is a being that has the capability of manipulating molecules and causing things to come alive when they weren't alive, ergo us, then there's some being out there that can make things come alive. So if that's true, raising somebody from the dead for this being, honestly, it's not only is it not hard to believe, it's not even that impressive. I mean, he could make anything come alive at any time. He could create something, manipulate molecules. So yeah, that was Paul's view, and just soak that in. Like, that should become your view, and just kind of the way you, not that you got to be rude or obnoxious to people, but you definitely shouldn't be ashamed of what you believe, okay? Not only is resurrection possible, but in history, if you follow the evidence, apparently it happened. Jesus of Nazareth apparently rose from the dead. We have multiple independent eyewitness accounts, incredibly well documented. Some of the best documented pieces of writing in history are the documents written by John, the Apostle John. I have a copy of one here where John says, I saw Jesus alive. I touched him. Okay? It's currently this one is in the Bodmer Museum in Geneva, Switzerland. But it's the Gospel of John, all right? Paul, the Apostle Paul, I saw him. Okay, this is a copy of his account, 1 Corinthians. It's in the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor Library. 1 Corinthians. I saw the guy alive. All right, Paul, John, Paul, Matthew. I saw him. I saw him. Okay? Peter. It's a copy of P72. I saw Jesus alive. Okay? We got 4 eyewitness accounts in history written down on scrolls. You can go read them in museums where these 4 men said, hey, I saw the guy alive. You go find me somebody else in history who's got that many people, eyewitnesses, independently have written down that they saw him alive after he died. Somebody else that's risen from the dead that has that much evidence supporting it. We're from reliable witnesses, men whose later lives after they said this, we know they didn't get rich, they didn't run for political office, they didn't take a bunch of wives. They basically lost everything, suffered, and most of them, a lot of them died, okay, including Peter and Paul. And John spent a lot of years in prison. I mean, these guys had no motivation to lie. They were reasonable people who said, hey, a dude has risen from the dead. Like, if that doesn't motivate you to want to follow him, sorry, but you're the crazy one. Okay? So take that in. That was Paul's attitude. Bold, clear, convincing. To the Christians in the first generation, the resurrection was the proof that Jesus is the chosen one, and everybody in their right mind should follow him and follow him now, repenting of their sins and trusting in him and following him with all their heart. To them, it was the most logical, clear decision anybody could make. And today, for the 21st century world, the resurrection of Jesus still is the proof. It's been documented. And God is not obliged to give anybody more proof than that. If they're not willing to follow that evidence, no matter what evidence you provide, they're probably not going to follow. The resurrection is the proof. And it's the only proof that God is obliged to give. He wasn't even obliged to do that, but it is the proof that he's provided for the world, that Jesus is the one. So yeah, soak that in. Let it become a part of who you are. Take the boldness of Paul, the spirit and attitude that Paul had, and just soak it in. Let it drive out your fears, some of your insecurities about what you believe in modern day. Because the evidence hasn't changed, guys, and it's still just as clear and convincing as ever. So, well, as Dr. Luke said, only 2 chapters left in the book. Next week we start Paul's final adventure, part 1. Be sure you don't miss it. Later, guys.